Oranges actually do not exist in nature.
Well, she makes the information very easy to understand.
What happens when we add milk to our coffee?
By doing that, she also makes it very sensational sometimes and exaggerates the claims.
Lauryna Nelkine is a passionate nutrition scientist interested in a modern food environment and health misinformation online. She holds a bachelor's degree in food, nutrition, and health sciences from Maastricht University in the Netherlands, and a master's degree in medical and nutrition sciences from Karolinska Institute in Sweden. She's published research in the field of nutrition pharmacotherapy and conducted a research study with UNICEF. Can you think of any specific examples that have been hyper-sensationalized?
That we eat the carbs that we like, but if we have a vinegar drink before.
For us healthy individuals, do we really need to start, our nice dinner with a flask of apple cider vinegar? There are certain foods that she's obsessed about, for example, oats. There are podcasts where she's like, oats are full of starch, you shouldn't eat it, it will spike your glucose.
Don't do oats.
In the context of a balanced diet, there's no such thing as bad food.
Hi, I'm Caroline from Healthnews, and today we're talking nutrition. Welcome, Lauryna.
Thank you for having me.
In recent years, there has been growing interest in the role of glucose in our overall health and well-being, as more people seek ways to optimize their diets and manage blood sugar levels. New voices and approaches have emerged in the nutrition world. One such figure is the glucose goddess. So what's your take on her emphasis on glucose control? How do you think that relates to other important nutritional and lifestyle factors as it relates to glucose?
Yeah, so basically what we see on her social media, in some ways these hacks, they are good nutrition advice, right? That we can all follow. For example, having a more balanced plate, having more veggies with our meals, having good fats. So that's important. That's what every nutrition guideline recommends, right? Mm-hmm. But also on the other hand, there's such a hyper focus on glucose management that it seems that sometimes we lose the focus on other important factors that influence our health. Mm-hmm. So this is where it becomes tricky. She makes the information very easy to understand. Mm-hmm. But by doing that, she also makes it very sensational sometimes and exaggerates the claims. And at some points, it no longer becomes substantiated. So that's problematic.
Can you think of any specific examples that have been hyper-sensationalized that she's made?
Yeah, so for example, she talks and she shows her life. That's why she's also very interesting to watch, right? Because she applies everything in her life. She shows how she lives. So for example, every time she goes to a cafe or a restaurant, she starts by drinking apple cider vinegar from a flask. So, it's a bit ridiculous in my opinion. So she does this, and for us healthy individuals, do we really need to start, our nice dinner with a flask of apple cider vinegar? I don't think so. So that's one thing. Also, she has these beautiful graphics of how certain foods affect our blood sugar. Mm-hmm. So for example, she could have like a brownie, and if you eat a brownie, you would have a certain glucose spike, right? But then she says, but if you combine it with more fats, let's say you add butter, then it becomes like less of a spike. So she kind of promotes this addition of different foods, and this way she's like, I never demonize foods, and this way, by following her hacks, you're supposed to be able to eat anything. Just if you combine it or do it the way she advertises, then you are supposed to be healthy, which is not always the case, right? Also, she goes on many podcasts, and nutrition professionals have been criticizing her because, for example, she fearmongers people about certain foods. While on one hand, she's like, you can eat anything goes, just do these hacks. But on the other hand, there are certain foods that she's obsessed about, for example, oats. There are podcasts where she's like, oats are full of starch, you shouldn't eat it, it will spike your glucose. Like there are many other better foods like proteins and eggs, and you shouldn't, oats are so bad, oat milk is so bad. But in the context of a balanced diet, there's no such thing as bad food.
Sure.
So that's where I find it hard to follow her advice completely.
Yes, I understand. I mean, I can see, based on what you're telling me, how people can be, how that can appeal to certain people, making it more accessible and giving exact answers, sort of, but also kind of saying, every food is okay, except for oats. Don't do oats. So with that in mind, how can individuals critically evaluate whether these are effective and safe, the supplements that she promotes? So she's been talking about some supplements on her program. Given the fact that so many people appeal to or find her approach appealing, how can we really understand whether they're effective?
So basically recently she created this kind of anti-spike supplement. And of course it's a commercial thing. When you become this popular, you want to monetize from that, right? So this I see it as a natural consequence of this. And she's a very smart businesswoman. I can give her that for sure. But when you look at the ingredients of these supplements, right? When you look at the idea behind the supplement, do healthy people who even follow these nutrition hacks that she's promoting, do they really need to now eat or consume a supplement? Of course, they can have a place in our diet, especially when we have certain nutritional gaps because of our lifestyle, because of certain conditions, right? But with these formulations, they add certain ingredients that have very weak evidence to have an effect. But also for people, it creates an illusion that it will truly help them, while in reality we don't know. There are no studies with this particular supplement. We have single ingredient studies, right, that show that certain ingredients may have a certain effect on blood glucose control. But when it comes to the whole formulation, we need studies that evaluate the whole of it, how it works on humans, not on animals, not on cells. Also, another thing to take into account when we're talking about supplements on the market, right? There could be anything. They're not regulated in the same manner as drugs, for example, right? So it means that their safety, their quality, their efficacy, they could be anything. You could get anything. It's a lottery out there. So, just playing with your health, consuming something that you are really not aware what is inside, I do not really recommend that. If people really want to make sure that their blood sugar is in check, or if they really have certain problems with the blood glucose management, you need to visit a doctor. You need to get a medical practitioner to evaluate your blood, to do proper tests, and to prescribe what should be applied in that case.
So aside from visiting a doctor, which is obviously what we recommend, and apart from just blindly listening to someone, an influencer's recommendations on YouTube, what do you think are effective strategies for minimizing glucose spikes, particularly in meals that are higher in carbohydrates?
Yeah, so there are certain, even glucose goddess hacks that do have some substantiation, right? And that do work. So as I mentioned before, having your carbohydrates together with protein, together with fiber-rich foods like vegetables, having it with healthy fat, that will increase the time of digestion. It means that glucose will appear in your blood in a slower pace, right? Leading to a less huge glucose response, right? Leading to a smaller spike or more stable blood sugar. So that's one of the approaches. Another approach, which also has some evidence, is having food in a bit of an order. So if you're consuming something very, very sweet, it's a good idea to have a protein or a fiber meal in the beginning and then do that afterwards. So that also has an effect. Another very important thing that people forget is that being active when we eat carbohydrates is doing the purpose. Glucose is a fuel source, and our muscles use it very well, right? So if we want to consume these sweeter foods, or if we're consuming higher carbohydrate foods like bread or pasta, right, it's always a good idea to use it for the given purpose, right? To be active, because then what happens is sugar in our blood will be delivered to the muscle cells and used as an energy source. This way, we can control these spikes. So if you want to have a more better insulin control, better blood sugar control, right? You need to exercise, and usually that's a resistance training. So if you do resistance training, it means that your muscles throughout the day will take up glucose from blood more efficiently, more effectively, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind. It's about the balance, right? Being active, trying to eat mindfully, trying to combine all of the food groups, not just carbohydrates. If you do that, this will already benefit your blood glucose management tremendously.
Those are great tips. Thank you. Now, can you speak to the role of genetics in glucose spikes? People say, their glucose issues or their weight issues are related to genetics more. Would you say it's fair to blame lifestyle choices alone for issues like insulin resistance, or can we look at genetics as a role?
Yeah, so genetics definitely do play a role in glucose management and glucose control in different factors that affect glucose control, right? Insulin resistance and stuff like that. But lifestyle is also a huge contributor to developing prediabetes, to developing type 2 diabetes. So there are different things, different factors that will affect it. And also it depends, what are we talking about? Are we talking about type 1 diabetes? Are we talking about type 2 diabetes? Lifestyle and, for example, older age, obesity, overweight, your diet, your activity levels, these will all have an effect on how well you manage blood glucose, right? So it's important to take everything into account, not just blame one thing or another thing, because of course these factors will have an effect, genetics will have an effect, but it's not just genetics.
Would you say that glucose spikes are something that the general public needs to be more aware of? Or is there a certain population which needs to be more mindful about their blood glucose levels and their tracking their spikes?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And when we're talking about different populations, of course, for people with prediabetes, for people with diabetes, it's very important to track their blood glucose, because these huge spikes or huge drops in your blood glucose, right? It could be detrimental. It could lead to, you losing consciousness, you knowing when to inject insulin, right? And this could be life-saving. So for example, when these people are wearing blood glucose monitors, that totally makes sense. This is life-changing, this is life-saving for them, right? But for people who don't have that, it's just like hyper-focusing on these little spikes without further knowledge. This creates so much health anxiety. I don't see how it could work. And also, this hyper-focus leads to, wrongful practices, and just focusing on glucose management and these certain hacks to control these little spikes, right? It may prevent people from consuming important foods. For example, I've heard individuals complaining about berries. Like, I saw that berries had a spike on me, right? Or after consuming berries, I saw a huge spike on my blood glucose monitor, right? But what they don't understand, that there are many things that increase our blood sugar, right? And many things that can spike our blood sugar. So just hyper-focus on these single foods and demonizing them, we know that berries are an absolutely healthy thing. It's a source of antioxidants, it's a source of fiber, it's a source of vitamins and minerals, right? But just focusing these hacks, this can scare people, and just following certain number without understanding further context, what it means. And actually, when we're focusing only on blood glucose management, we may lose the focus on other aspects of health, like blood lipid control, which is also a huge risk factor for heart disease. It's a balance, and I would really advise people to follow proper nutrition professionals, registered dietitians, nutrition scientists who have a bigger context of health, not just focus on one trend or one health parameter, and have a bigger picture of what's important for our health.
So we're going to talk about nutrition secrets now from the blue zones, which is something that I've heard a lot about. So can you start by telling us where some of these blue zones are? Yes. And can we get a ticket there immediately?
Absolutely. So there are 5 suggested blue zones, right? it's Japan, it's Italy, it's Greece, it's Costa Rica, and California in the United States, right? So I think I mentioned all of them. It is suggested by this author who wrote a book on these blue zones, right? That people there live the longest, right? There are the most individuals who reach the age of 100.
Okay.
So that's the idea behind that, and that these people follow certain health practices.
In these blue zones, what do you think are the main factors that contribute to longevity, and how much of that is influenced by their diet?
Yeah, so there are several strategies that this book suggests as working for, for longevity. But I also want to quickly jump into this idea, right? And actually, there are some controversies around blue zones. I know that it's popularized. It's quite, you can find certain aspects that do work there, and that, we have a Netflix documentary, right? It's been in public, right? And people perceive this as some kind of like interesting, influential trend, right? And that we can follow these habits and also, live longer. But in reality, certain data coming from these blue zones, there are studies that show that it's actually the records are not correct. Uh-oh. Or that data is also the writer who wrote this book, right? He's not a medic. He doesn't have a medical background. He's a writer. He's a journalist, and certain practices, certain research that he says that he did for this book is not peer reviewed. So we cannot use it as a proper research studies, proper evidence. And when scientists looked into these records, actually they saw that certain individuals, they have their date of birth incorrect because it happened many years ago, right? Oh, no. And some people in these little regions, it wasn't as strict registering these people, right? Sure. So the standards were different in a day. So it might have happened that these people have not really lived to 100, right? Okay. Or that certain practices, like for example, in Okinawa, Japan, right? One of the blue zones, they're actually nowadays, it's one of the places in Japan with the highest obesity rates. So it seems that certain aspects in this book are not really the case anymore these days, or it needs a bit more scrutiny. But I, of course, agree that certain practices are health promoting to this day, and we can benefit from that even if certain records are not completely correct.
What do they say, how do they describe the typical diets of these blue zones to make the point that they have this longer lifespan in these blue zones?
Yeah, so it's suggested that these people mostly follow plant-based diet, right? So they consume a lot of greens, they consume a lot of vegetables, they consume certain kind of healthy fats, they have carbohydrates in their plates. So that's an important factor in there. So a lot of variety, a lot of plant-based foods, right? Another interesting idea in their diets is suggested that they follow, especially from Japan, there is this concept of harahachibu, and this is idea that you consume food until you're 80% satisfied. Huh. Yeah, so
I wish I had a meter on myself.
Yeah, so people try to practice that, and they feel like you never eat to being like fully distinguishing your hunger, right? Okay. You need to eat to still remain a little bit hungry. This way people tend to, at least this is suggested how it works, right? This way people may have like better caloric intake, right? Less calories, and this way they can maintain their physique, their body weight, with less effort, right?
Okay. Yeah. Aside from the 80%, which is interesting, I feel like I'm going to have to try that. Are there any other surprising or lesser known habits that people in the blue zones employ?
Yeah, so one of the habits is having a purpose. I feel that this is very beautiful, and I think it's very important for us as humans to have something we can focus on, right? And this way we are more motivated to do things in life instead of just like focusing on eating, sitting, and not doing anything. This is very important there. Another thing that also that I really encourage people to do is finding the social aspect, finding the joy in your social group, in your family, in your friends, and spending time with them. Because we have evidence that people who are surrounded by others, who do certain activities together, that we do not age as fast, right? This community aspect is very important in aging, right? And people who have these circles of friends, of co-workers that they can hang out with, that's important for our longevity. It's important for our happiness. It's important for our heart health, right? So having this in place is sometimes neglected, but also very important factors besides healthy diet, exercising, sleep hygiene, managing of your stress, right? So,
but going back to diet, they also talk about areas in the blue zone often include moderate alcohol consumption, but obviously alcohol is a known health risk. How do we make sense of this contradiction?
Yeah, so I love this question because for many years we had research that showed that actually moderate alcohol consumption has beneficial health effects, right? With alcohol consumption increasing, we see that health effects, beneficial health effects, they diminish and even turn to the opposite side, right? It becomes contradictory to health, right? It can have a negative health effect, right? So we used to think like this is the case, right? But with more research appearing and with more evidence, recently there is enough evidence to say that there is no amount of alcohol that is beneficial for our health. And every time we drink alcohol, it will have certain health risk. The question is whether we want to take these risks. And it's fine. As adults, we have to, sometimes we can take this risk, right? But we have to be mindful about that. And alcohol is a cancerogenic compound, and it has been linked to several types of cancer, and even with small amounts of that. So it may have certain beneficial compounds in there, like, antioxidants, especially if we were talking about wine, right? But no more, we believe that this is enough to have a health benefit.
There's a growing market for Blue Zone branded foods and supplements. So what's your opinion? Do you think these products genuinely reflect the benefits of Blue Zone diets, or are they just making money?
Yeah, I think it's more of a making money and, playing on this trend and, using vulnerable people to, if it's not harmful, if it's something like some products, some food products, for example, some olive oil that is coming from blue zones, I don't see a problem with that, right? It's use it, consume it, be mindful about that and enjoy it, right? But if it's something like supplements or some formulations that are based on blue zones, I don't know. I'm very skeptical about that. So it depends on what kind of product is that, right? Is it something for your mindfulness? Sure, do that. If it's some kind of like a game or some kind of like activity, right? Promoting product, that's nice, right? If that makes you live better, more interesting, sure, I support these practices, I support these products. But if it's something that promises you something out of the line, that is extremely sensational, that is, it doesn't sound realistic, I wouldn't bother.
If you could just sum up some simple and practical steps people can take from this blue zone idea, not even if it's really, true or accurate, but the mindset that would help support their well-being in this fast-paced world, what would you suggest they do?
Yeah, so it's very important to focus on your diet. Diet is such a huge factor affecting how we age. It affects many chronic diseases, the development of many chronic diseases, right? So of course, trying to be mindful of what we eat, try to always have a variety in our plates, try to eat different colored foods. That's a good way. That's a good place to start, right? Also, trying to limit alcohol, try to quit smoking, being more active, trying to find activities that you can enjoy. Because for people, being active is a chore most of the time, right? But we should change the way we think about physical exercise, right? Sometimes stretching in the park, or going for a run, or going swimming, going jumping, going rollerblading. There are so many things. So finding something that truly fits your personality, that truly fits your lifestyle, is a way to go and enjoy this, and also get the benefits from exercising that are so important. And also other things, like making sure that you're not only living, eating, sleeping, right? But also finding ways to enjoy your life, finding your purpose, finding people you can learn from, surrounding yourself with supportive people. I think that's also very, very important for our health, and that can have a very big effect.
Wonderful. Well, those are all wonderful tips. Now let's talk about hunger. So can you start by defining the different types of hunger and how they manifest in our daily lives?
Physiological hunger is when we receive the cues from our body that we need to eat.
Okay.
Right? So if we feel some grumbling in our stomach, or if we are becoming a bit more grumpy, this is the key from your body, from a very nicely orchestrated hormonal system that we need to consume food to have energy. Then, if we're talking about emotional hunger is usually one of the ways to cope with emotions, right? It could also be affected by our stress levels, by different hormones, by certain learned situations to deal with emotions, to deal with stress, right? So this way, we receive a cue from a certain situation. We should be consuming food to make us feel better, to reduce stress, to make our day better, to make us feel happier.
Little treat, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is where emotional eating comes from. Yeah, and then if we're talking about social eating, this usually manifest in certain social situations, right, where we're having celebrations. We may not be necessarily naturally hungry in that situation, right, or physiologically hungry, but since everyone is celebrating, everyone is enjoying this piece of cake, we're also encouraged to do so. Right. So that's how social hunger works. And the last one was
habitual.
Okay, so habitual is usually when we talk about, there are types of people who have a very strict eating schedule. It works really well for them. If they see that there's 12 o'clock, they know that they need to eat, or they will be hangry. So this is how it works for certain individuals. They have foods every day at very specific times, and our bodies adjust to that, right? So eventually we receive certain physiological cues to consume foods. So it has something in common with physiological hunger, but it's more, of course, linked to the habit of eating.
Now, maybe you can help me, because I often fall in this trap of social hunger. I am at my house and I have my lunch because I'm physiologically hungry, but then I go to a coffee with a friend and I'm like, oh, that muffin looks so good, and everyone around me is eating. Can you give us some tips or cues for how to manage social hunger so that we can navigate these situations without feeling pressured to eat?
It's a very interesting question, and whenever I answer this question, I know that there is so much anxiety about eating out, about being bad, about consuming things or foods that are considered on our bad list, guilty things, right? But is it really? I don't like that idea. I feel that everything fits in a balanced diet, and sometimes food can also provide a lot through the social aspect, right?
Sure.
When we have a meeting with our dear friend, when we see our spouse, right? When we have a very nice dinner with our mom, right? It could have so many good memories. This anxiety about having a piece of cake or having a muffin or having some crisps or whatever, you feel guilty and you no longer can enjoy that moment. Right. And sometimes it's so special, creating these memories with food. It's okay. We shouldn't be worried about that too much, right? We have to have certain flexibility around foods, because that is also part of enjoyment. Food is not just, energy. Food is about enjoyment. Food is about creating memories. Food is about love. Food is about socializing. So if you are able to, to do it mindfully, to enjoy this little piece of cake, I think it's much healthier approach than being, every time restricting yourself to the point where when this situation appears, you feel so bad afterwards. You start binge eating, right? So I'd rather suggest having a much more balanced approach. Try to work on your hunger cues, on your satiety cues throughout the day. Try not to be hungry before these occasions where you have the social opportunities to have a piece of cake, right? But also when you work on these, when it's in check, when your body is properly fueled, when you have enough carbohydrates, when you have enough protein and fats, then these discretionary foods don't appear as appealing as if we're hungry.
Sure.
So in these situations, we can say no to these foods, or we can just eat a piece of that and be fine with that, because we're in line with our body's cues. So I think this comes to both physiological things, right? Physiological aspects of eating, but also psychological aspects. And it's always a connection of these. It's always an interaction of these things.
I like that approach. So let's talk about the diet industry for a little bit. They offer products like meal replacement shakes, diet pills, appetite suppressants. What's your opinion on these? Do you think they exploit possibly vulnerable individuals by capitalizing on these struggles that they have emotionally? Or can it genuinely provide support for people who deal with emotional hunger?
It's really upsetting for me to see what's happening on our market, because I understand that people want an easy way to deal with their problems, with their health issues, right? If the people have overweight, they want to lose it fast, right? And that's how these marketing geniuses, these companies are benefiting, right? Are profiting from these vulnerable people who believe that actually this will be this final approach, this final thing that would help me do this or that, right? So if you look on the market right now, I'm sure you could find any kind of supplement, any kind of device, or any kind of app for whatever issue you have, right? So it can solve anything. But unfortunately, as we see with all the obesity rates increasing and diabetes rates increasing, these supplements do not work, right? I mean, it has a place. As I said, if certain people have certain nutritional deficiencies, if there's specific health goals in mind, and the product is really formulated to address that. But with these weight loss pills, it's not just about that. Weight loss is not something that you can easily get. It requires certain habit change. It requires lifestyle change. It requires a balanced diet. It requires physical activity. It requires stress management. It requires sleep hygiene. Many things, and are in this formula of weight loss. So if you have these meal replacement shakes or weight loss pills, it's just a little bit, like tiny part of this whole picture, right? Tiny piece of the puzzle, because that may have certain effect on your fat metabolism, or on your metabolism, on other things that are important in the bigger context of weight loss. But you have to do the bigger job yourself, like hard work yourself. But just experimenting with yourself and spending so much money on these things, I would be a bit skeptical.
Do you have any other methods to address emotional eating issues?
Yeah, so when it comes to emotional eating, it's important to understand what is the root cause, right? What are we trying to deal with? Are we trying to deal with a lot of stress at work? Do we not sleep because we have a tiny toddler at home? What's happening? Are we constantly upset by our spouse, right? Maybe eating became the only coping mechanism that we have. And this could become a problem. Because if if we use eating as a coping mechanism only sometimes, it's fine. Nothing will happen. It will sound horrible from my mouth as a nutritionist, but sometimes having a pack of crisps, this will give you freedom, and at that point it will soothe your emotions. But it becomes problematic when it's the only coping mechanism. Mm-hmm. If we don't have other ways to deal with emotions, to deal with stress. So ideally, you would learn how to identify your emotions, how to find ways that help you to feel better, right? In these moments. Maybe it could be journaling, maybe it could be going for a run, maybe you need to go to therapy, which is also a very good thing. And if you're, only dealing with your emotions by consuming big portions of very nice foods, like if you're eating a lot of sugary foods, fatty foods like cookies, crisps, and that's the only way how you can feel better, you will not. Eventually people feel more guilty of consuming, of binge eating, right?
Right.
But also another very important thing when it comes to emotional eating, people tend to eat more emotionally when they do not provide proper fuel throughout the day, throughout the week. Mm-hmm. So if you are constantly restricting calories, if you are constantly restricting carbohydrates, you don't have proper energy sources. It's very easy for your brain to make these foods, these discretionary foods, these desserts or these snacks look more appealing. Mm-hmm. And this way it becomes easier to overconsume them and feel guilty about that. So many people do struggle with that, but it's a very complex mechanism, and it's important, as I said before, to find the root cause, to work with your emotions, to find what triggers you, and also make sure that you're fueling properly throughout the day.
I know a lot of people turn to the internet when they have no idea, what do I have for dinner tonight? What famous people think, what do they eat for dinner, right? And they promote these idealized versions of meals and diets, and they show you, and it's beautiful and perfect. But how do you think that this portrayal affects people's expectations and perceptions of healthy eating in reality?
Yeah, so it can be actually quite damaging, especially for more vulnerable people, for people who are prone to disordered eating habits. So there is this trend, what I eat in a day. Maybe you saw that, and there could be a very fit woman, very beautifully looking woman who will show what she's eating, and tiny portions or bits of beautifully arranged bowls or little meals, little breakfast options, right? But you don't know what this person is eating behind the camera, right? We also are all so different. We have different activity levels. We have very different lifestyles. We have different energy needs. We have different roles, for parents, for maybe we are working very hard and we're very busy. So all of these things need to be taken into account, right? Mm-hmm. To make sure that we are properly fueling for our body and that this really works for us. So what is portrayed, it can be very beautiful, but it can also, we always compare, right? We have this, social media has this effect. So if something looks good, and if they eat that, I want that, right? I also want to look good. I also want to feel like this person, like happy, beautiful, sparkling, and what we do, we try to follow that, but that does not necessarily match our lifestyle, cultural heritage. So these things, they are very important, and we can do this for a certain point, for a certain time, right? Mm-hmm. But it's not necessarily that we are following what's really the best for us.
Can you speak for a minute about food addiction? Because people often think that emotional eating and habitual hunger are kind of the same thing as food addiction. Do you think that it's a legitimate condition?
It's very interesting. There is actually a lot of discussions happening around the topic, because we have some studies that show that, when people consume sugar, right, it lights up their brain in a similar manner as if we consume cocaine. Oh, wow. Right? Yeah, so this is where these ideas come from, right? It seems that, if we can see on the brain scans that it lights up your brain similarly to what happens with addiction, right?
Sure.
Food must be addictive as well. but we forget the context. Again, usually these studies are done on rodents with very huge amounts of sugar or other pleasure-inducing ingredients. It is not necessarily reflective of what we eat as humans and the portions and the amounts we consume on our daily diets, right? Another thing, it has also been discussed that many things can spark up our brain regions responsible for pleasure, for dopamine, right? So, and also addiction in that manner, right? But similar as sugar, just thinking about your loved one, thinking about sex could spark up your brain in the same way. Right. Is it really addictive then? So there's there's debate, and there's we still need more evidence to understand this phenomenon. Of course, there might be certain individuals that are more prone to addictive behaviors or to certain emotional background, to certain feeling, how we feel when we consume certain foods. This could be like an addictive part in there, but it's still in its infancy. The research is still in its infancy, and we still need to understand how it works in humans before making it as a concept.
Okay.
Or something, with addictions, we need treatment, right? And we do have treatment with certain addictions. With food addictions, we still don't understand the mechanisms to have a proper treatment. And sometimes it could be exaggerated. And certain people are like, I'm constantly craving Coca-Cola. So it must be that I have a food addiction. I'm addicted to Coke,
Right.
But it's not always the case. Sure. Sometimes you just need to balance your diet and start eating more fiber, more veggies, more fruit, and you realize that, actually I'm not that addicted to that anymore because I'm no longer restricting other foods, right? So there are many things to consider before validating this phenomenon.
We're going to change topics a little bit to superfoods. So they've become a hot topic in the health and wellness industry, often praised as nutrient powerhouses that can transform our diets and health. To kick things off, can you explain what exactly defines a superfood and why these foods have gained such immense popularity in recent years?
Yeah, so there's no definition, no legal definition of superfoods. It's just a marketing gimmick, as you said, right? Of course it is. In reality, these foods are, of course, very nutritious. They pack a lot of nutrients, vitamins, minerals, and sometimes more than other foods, right? So in that regard, they play this huge role, and marketing guys or girls, they decide that it's an amazing way to sell more of these things because people want to be healthy. We want to consume something super, that's something, better than anything else. And, companies and food industry can benefit from that, can profit from that, right? And of course, these foods have a role in our diets. It can be important, but again, can we only rely on these foods? Even if they're called superfoods, right? No, of course not. We need much more than that. And sometimes sometimes these are trendy foods, something novel, something that has not been previously used in our diets or in our cuisine. As individuals, as humans, right? We always seek for novelty. So, these superfoods, I think, play this kind of role.
When we talk about superfoods that the marketing geniuses have come up with, like acai berries, turmeric, and chia seeds, which are 3 examples, they offer, apparently, they're said to offer extraordinary health benefits like immune system support or preventing chronic disease. How much do you think these claims are actually supported by solid scientific proof, and how much is just hype?
All of these foods indeed do offer, they're packed with antioxidants, flavonoids, anthocyanins, all these compounds that are important for these benefits like anti-inflammatory effects, antioxidant effect, right? Heart health promotive effects. So these foods do have some supportive evidence that they work this way, but it's not about, and also usually this evidence comes from animal studies where again it's used, these products, these foods are used in very huge amounts. So this way we can see this effect, right? But when it comes to our diets, the amounts we are able to consume usually it's not enough to have such a huge effect. But of course, if we want to be healthier, including these foods, but not obsessing about them, could be a good idea, right? It could support your health, but we need more. It's not just that will ensure that you're, disease-free forever.
Forever.
Yeah. So,
one and done.
Yeah.
So they're often promoted for their antioxidant content. But do you think there's a risk of consuming too many antioxidants, potentially leading to negative health effects?
Yeah, we do know that actually if we consume too much of the antioxidants, this can have the opposite effect. It can work as pro-oxidants. So our bodies are smart. We have an innate antioxidant system, right? So for example, if we consume too much of these antioxidant foods, usually like acai berries, right? Or something like blueberries, that could also be a source of other vitamins or other minerals, right? And if we consume it in ridiculous amounts, for example, in powder form, right? This could be a source of vitamin C, and too much of vitamin C can lead to kidney stones. So, it's always about the balance, and too much of the good thing could also have negative effects.
So there are always new superfoods that are constantly being discovered and promoted. So what's your best tip for consumers distinguishing between genuinely beneficial foods and passing fads?
Yeah, so, I absolutely agree with you that there's so many new products, novel foods, novel ingredients appearing on the market every day, right? But gladly, we live in a modern society where we have official bodies or official institutions that seriously evaluate the effect of these foods, the safety of these foods, and we have institutions like FDA that approve certain health claims. So it's always a good idea to check whether a certain claim about the product, about the ingredient, is truly substantiated. You can find this information online. It's widely available. And, marketing will use many things, but they would put asterisks at the end, and they will describe that, there are hidden rules or hidden conditions under this, and that these statements are not necessarily FDA approved or not necessarily substantiated, right? So following the advice from official institutions is a good first step, but also, using common sense. Can it really treat cancer? Can single ingredient, can single food treat cancer? Probably not. And, some companies do use these exaggerated, these sensational claims, but it just sometimes just taking these claims with a grain of salt is a good idea.
I want to thank you so much for joining us. And please be sure to check in for future videos on Health News. Thank you.